finance is not rocket science, but a necessary aspect of making our dreams come true. I would sleep on the worst bed in the world to be in the presence of that awe. That's always been the role of art, isn't it?
Welcome to Vita Brevis, a podcast about business, art, life, and death. I'm your host, Carlos Cardenas. Here we explore how business, creativity, and philanthropy intersect through the lives of remarkable people. I talk with entrepreneurs and community leaders who are passionate collectors and visionary patrons to discover how art shapes their work, purpose, and legacy. Because life is short, but art is forever. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Vita Brevis. I am joined today by my good friend Channing Henry. Hi, Channing.
Hey, Carlos.
How are you doing today?
Great.
All
Happy
right.
to be joining you in this conversation. This is fun.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So you are in Austin, Texas right now, right?
I am. Yeah,
Cool.
that's rare. I'm a traveling person often.
Where was your last trip? Business trip, I should say.
Aspen. Well,
Oh, that was
Aspen.
kind of
Yes,
business, right?
it was. It was. I'm one of those people that did not learn how to play golf, but I do like to do some business on the slopes with
Oh,
my
perfect.
hospitality deal makers. So it works out
Great.
nicely.
Great. Well, let's get into it then. I think you already kind of set the table here. So tell us about what you do in the hospitality space and in general. Tell us about you, Channing.
I really love the built world and creating spaces. I grew up with architects, went to business school. Really, I say just to learn that finance is not rocket science, but a necessary aspect of making our dreams come true. And so I love to help creative endeavors get made in the world, and real estate. I mean, I can't tell you a thing about AI or tech. I
Mm-hmm.
love the tangible spaces that we all love to operate in, and I always think of hospitality as really kind of the artists of the real estate world, and we are lucky to be able to have that opportunity on, a pretty much nightly, daily basis to get to engage a lot of people with their senses and with new opportunities. And so it's always been a wonderful invitation to get playful, and inspired, but also, with extraordinary capital investment budgets. You have to make $100 million budgets work and get to 20-25% returns on investment for some very bold equity investors and some very persnickety debt investors. and
Mm-hmm.
um and so it's a fun puzzle to put together. And so I've been a developer. I put some Viceroy hotels together. I've worked on an Aman Resort. I've worked on a bunkhouse resort. I built the downtown LA proper hotel in partnership with the guys who run the proper brand. Um, I've had a lot of pretty extraordinary partners along the way in some of these creative development endeavors, and for the last 6 years plus, I've been leading the Americas consulting practice for a global organization that we help developers and landowners with their hospitality projects, figuring out how to put their deals together, what they should be building, who they should be partnering with in terms of brands. And
Not just in the U.S., right?
no, I've been in the Caribbean, going to Greenland next month. I've been in Mendoza, Argentina, which is taking a new shape in the wine world. Yeah, a lot of Americas and beyond.
And for the most part, these are hotels?
Yeah, it's all hospitality related. Sometimes it's membership clubs or branded residences. Condo hotels are making a comeback for those who remember the 80s, 90s, 2000s in Miami when it sort of felt like a little bit of a weird, frothy time, but, there's a lot of different concepts, and as we're getting into this post-COVID world, I think for better, we're all getting, very creative about how to utilize space and not waste space, and,
Mhm.
use co-working space in the daytime and turn it into event space in the nighttime and share a parking garage and really just try to make sure that we're not sprawling, but we are communing and engaging and really creating community. It's kind of fascinating. I think Austin actually is at the forefront right now of I don't think anything's permitted. This is a very Texas ask for forgiveness, not permission kind of approach. And Austin really is at the forefront of saying, why can't you have your cold plunge and yoga teacher and co-working space all in the same space all together? Because this is kind of how people like to spend a whole day, and you don't need to create multiple third spaces. Why not, put that all together? And so there's a whole slew of wellness co-working clubs that are popping up, and so I always say that hospitality is kind of the root of a real estate asset class, and you never have any idea what the other uses are going to be that are going to be working alongside that. But it tends to be something that is uh, a use that's almost daily, that isn't a month or year long lease that somebody's putting on it. So anything that's in the creative realm, that's kind of what we work with.
So, it's interesting about the space is that it's kind of a hybrid, right? And I've always considered, real estate development to be, the business of architecture, right? And it sort of sits at this crossroads between, finance and art. And it's
Hmm.
this weird sort of crossover where all of these elements have to come together. The built environment has to consider very human considerations. And then simultaneously, I mean, you mentioned, hundreds of millions of dollars for these projects.
Right. Right.
So you have to sort of bridge these things that almost seem diametrically opposed. So
Yeah.
is your main activity is it about sort of structuring all the capital that's needed or coordinating with the creatives or everything?
That's a great question. So just last night, a friend was saying, tell me why it is that there are any hotel meeting rooms that are built without natural light, having just come from some miserable Marriott off of a highway that,
Mhm.
some kind of gathering space. And I just said, when you've got a location that can only support a certain dollar amount per night for these hotel rooms, you've got to build a box that it's pretty doesn't have as many levels or layers or windows or, confusing elements to all the tradespeople and subcontractors as possible. And so, everything comes down to a price per key, in hotel speak. And it's what are you selling it for? What are you building it to? We always help our developers guide architects on what to try to design a hotel for in terms of a price per key budget. And that's all based on an intricate understanding of their land and the market and their potential brand partners and what the designers within those brand partnerships can create on site and what the competition is in the area. And if you build it, will they come? All of those supply demand factors.
Hmm.
And it really all kind of comes down to that price per key metric and what you get out of every key and every dollar that goes into that. And so, it is really wonderful if you can go to a Four Seasons and have your outdoor antechamber pre-event space that's, in the gardens under the trees. And then you can go into a room that doesn't have windows, but you can always pop out and have fresh air and you can,
Yeah.
have your breakouts in different ways. But in a room in a Marriott on a highway, where they're going to have spent $300,000 per key as opposed to $900,000 per key. That's where that experience plays out in every single decision. And that comes down to the carpets, obviously, the art on the walls, the quality of the linens. It's absolutely amazing to me how many decisions, go into every line item of a hotel construction budget. And then what we call the day two decisions, which are let's get the hotel open. And once we have some cash, let's then go in and fix the window treatments and make sure that we have blackout shades and,
Hmm.
all of the XYZ stuff. So the architects are happy because they're the first ones. They don't have to be value engineered. They do get constraints. We all love to talk about creative constraints and in I think life. Writers like deadlines. Um, Architects very much I think enjoy a tricky site. They obviously are given budgets to work with, and it's wonderful to work with that frame. It's when you start getting later in the process that things start getting pulled out, and it usually hits the interior designers down the
Ah,
line.
yeah.
And then it really hits the art budget, unfortunately. And the architects can be the happiest parts of the process because they're the ones that come in at the beginning and
Yeah.
really get to give it a lot of shape and hopefully not have to value engineer out too much from that
Hmm.
early vision.
Is that the hardest part of your job? Like sort of finding the balance between, over designing and overbuilding or, you know, under designing and underbuilding. To find that happy medium where something is still, interesting and comfortable and, checks all the boxes, but, won't bankrupt the developer.
It's a wonderful challenge. I love the creative constraints. I really do. I think currently my work has not gotten as much into the actual plans and decision making around that. Um, Hardest part of my job is knowing when a market is ready and and communicating to the money, to tell you the truth, that there's a lot of momentum happening and that these factors are ready for this leap of faith.
Well, the process is
Um,
slow, right? I mean, it's very time
yeah.
consuming, it's capital intensive. So, it's hard, I imagine, to sort of make quick, decisions on the fly.
No, and you have to read the tea leaves. You really do. I mean, how long have you been in Austin?
11 years this year.
Okay. So you've seen it change. I mean, just it's always so fun to harken back to an era that I did not know, but when Liz Lambert said Hotel San Jose, I mean, She had vision that nobody else could see, and now we've got Hermes and Soho House across the street, and that was a huge leap of faith, and I
Well,
tried for years to do that in Fort Worth, Texas, where you've got Tadeo Ando and Louis Kahn and Ricardo Legarreta and Philip Johnson, who have just some of the most extraordinary buildings in one tiny grouping in Texas, where the West begins. Just this wonderful, wonderful thing that Texans just I should be so proud to have Fort Worth's cultural district. And
yeah, it's
all we had
amazing. Like,
there,
it's a
yes, is
landmark. Yeah,
extraordinary.
yeah.
One of my favorite stories about Fort Worth was that when the Modern was interviewing architects, they really were excited about Tadeo Ando, and they said, you tend to do work that's next to like a mountain or some other extraordinary landmark. How are we so lucky that you want to do this? And he said, "Oh, Louis Kahn's Kimball is a mountain to me.
Oh,
Like, this
wow.
is such an honor for me to be able to build next to him." And anyway, so we just have this wonderful stuff, and all we had for so long was a Residence Inn, and my partner and I tried to get a hotel going there, and we were about 5 years too early, and there was, I mean, even John Goff, who did the Crescent Hotel, which is finally up and running now, he had a few running starts that didn't make it. Finally, the Crescent is beautiful, but what's really amazing is the Auberge Bowie House. But it took decades of people kinda trying to get something more exciting going, and now it's always, so obvious in hindsight. But yes, these things are big, undertakings, and it really does take a lot to be compelling for the right, signers of checks.
Yeah, well, it's fraught to say the least. But you mentioned something interesting talking about Liz Lambert, sort of seeing a potential down there, on South Congress here in Austin, where, you sort of have to create the environment in which you to live. If we
Yeah.
were all just sort of, passively kind of expecting things to pop up, nothing would ever happen. You know, an entrepreneur of thought has to come in there and, have a vision and find a way to, marshal the resources to execute. I've said this before, you have to be kind of delusional. I mean, we need
Yeah.
these people to kind of be a little nuts, to make it happen. It's really cool. So this reminds
Cowboys.
the Cowboys for sure, especially in Fort
Yeah.
Worth. So you mentioned the Modern, and Tadao Ando has, of course, he just did the Bourse de Commerce in Paris with Nem Architects.
Oh,
The Pinot Building in the Chamber of
yes.
Commerce in Paris. Yes. So
Yes.
let's start talking about art a little bit. Where is the spot for art in real estate development?
Well, there's the obvious, cities that ask developers, require developers to, put, a 2% of the development budget towards art fund, and then the cities will utilize those funds towards public art, and I think that's great. That works very well in a lot of cases. I think it is far more compelling sometimes when you really do get a designer, and developer that can work together to create moments that are unique and that are driven by in-place art within a building. And our building in downtown LA, very much had a lot of that, and it was driven by Kelly Wersler, our designer. And it's she has some wonderful ceramicists and muralists and, you know, oil painters whose work is throughout, the public spaces. When you start to get into the room art, you have to kind of get into some more affordable and slightly kind of repetitive solutions. But it's so much more fun when you've got a 150 room property versus 800 room Omni, where, they're kind of going with the same repetitive photography. And so I always have seen the hotel developer role as a little bit this noblesse oblige. You've got people coming into a space, and the responsibility is one's to have to bring in some culinary arts and bring in some musical arts and bring in the visual arts and really create a space that compels your captive audience to linger and see and be curious,
Yeah.
wonder who it is that they're looking at.
Well, it seems like psychologically, when we're in these spaces, we're already primed for some sort of unique experience. We're kind of out of our day to day. We're either traveling or there for an event or a conference, or there's something that sort of takes you outside of your day to day bubble. So, yeah, you're kind of primed to be extra conscious in a way. So, everything around you seems to be so much more amplified. And I like that you talk about these experiences being way beyond just the visual arts. I mean, it's food, it's music, it's, silence sometimes. There's so many
Mm.
different sensorial.
Mhm.
Stimulation going on at the same time. It's really really interesting. Um, I remember once you told me that you worked on James Turrell's Roden crater. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and that's kind of, if you look at the role of art and hospitality, that's almost reversed, and I would love to see more in this direction where you have land art create road trips. Let's get us on the road and let's get us out there. And it's something similar in a way to the Dia Art Foundation's lightning field. Walter de Maria. So when you get lucky enough to get a space, get taken out to his 125-year-old cabin in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico, and have this experience with his 400 lightning rods that are just perfectly, exquisitely placed throughout this beautiful piece of land that tends to attract lightning. I've been 3 times and haven't seen any lightning hit, but I've realized,
Mhm.
on the second time that I went, when I had spent so much time being with the rods and in this beautiful, simple cabin, that the moment the sun peeked up above the mountains, I just I had been so primed to be looking at light and the changing light on all of these rods that the moment it popped up into the window, I was there with the sun and realized that this journey with light had been the thing. It had been my whole experience, and it didn't matter about the lightning, and I'm probably gonna go back until I find the lightning, but it is so special, to be in the presence of an experience that is just so unique that I just adore that the hospitality aspect is a funky old cabin where you hear the springs of the bed, squeak, and
Mhm.
it's anathema to everything that I tell all of my clients about in terms of, like, quality hospitality, which I love that. I love that the art just
Well,
completely consumes what the hospitality experience should be, And you're getting me thinking that, I would love to have a cohesive experience where it truly is both, but in the in the in the realm of James Turrell, there's no hospitality that could ever even match what
Hmm.
he has.
There was a project to have a hotel next to the crater, right? But that never happened?
There have been interested parties for a long time. What this project was that I got to work on, was a vision that James had with Michael Govan, the head of LACMA. And I've worked with Michael on some just cool projects again that are a little bit merging artwork with hospitality landscape concepts over the years. And so Michael asked me if I would work on this with James, and he has, I mean, this Roden crater has, I think, about 24 installations planned inside the crater,
Oh,
and
wow.
it's incredibly careful engineering because the entire purpose of the crater is to experience the sun and the moon and kind of the Earth's geometry and spinning um, from within different parts of the crater, and it's
Mm.
this gorgeous golden staircase that he built up into one of his oculi, which he's very well known for. The way it was described to me, because its mathematical precision is just so perfect. At a certain day, one of the equinoxes, the light shines perfectly and the sun kind of walks down each golden staircase step just absolutely perfectly. And it really ultimately is liquid geometry in form. Just something that, thank God,
Is
we
that a
have
term he
artists that
uses?
can help. Yeah, that we can.
Liquid
That
geometry. I haven't heard that. It's amazing.
Yeah. And he's only built, I think maybe now at this point, 6 of the 24 installations. These are massive earthworks, very expensive horizontal construction work to do, and he's very private about having anybody go to the crater until the whole thing is complete. And
That
so Michael's
that'll be
idea
50 years from
was,
now, right? That'll be
yeah,
50 years from now. Yeah.
yeah. And Michael just said, "Well, he's built these chambers inside of the crater. What if we were able to pre-sell room nights, like as a graduation gift or a wedding gift, for donors who wanted to offer, or to themselves or as gifts, a very special preview night, in order to do a fundraising campaign around that." And so it was a very special way to say, I get to be the first one to sleep in Roden Crater when it's finally done, and here's my check for $50,000 or $500,000 in order to get there. And so we um we tried to make it a sleep in the underground hotel and have your deep first experience with the crater. Um and needed a little bit of funding to get that plan going, and some of the bigger donors, all it's funny what they end up really wanting is their own Turrell and their own home. That's the hard
Oh,
part.
yeah. Yeah, there's one here in town I know, and it's actually a pool. It's an orb on a pool. Um, Amazing stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's great that we're finally talking about art. When were you introduced to art? Was it something that just sort of was always integrated into architecture, and it was kind of an organic introduction?
Well, I grew up with, it was very much a part of our family. I grew up with architects, and one of them was quite celebrated in Texas. He designed North Park Mall, and his uh client for that is Ray Nasher, who has the Nasher Sculpture Garden, and, really and truly, as a family, we would mostly go to Europe and go to art museums, and I had some incredible, teachers. I went to Princeton for undergrad and had a lot of great art history courses, especially, one friend whose father taught art history at the American University of Paris, and she really helped me, I think, see what was the Renaissance versus medieval art, and then we would go into the city and stand in front of St. Francis of Assisi at the Frick, and it just started to become this New York, joy everywhere that I went.
It does seem like there was a fuzzy line, and it was a process and not like a clear-cut moment or person. And everybody's sort of, introduction to art is a little bit different.
Well,
Um,
I will say something about this. So my introduction to art was definitely with all the courses and all the eras, right? A real understanding and all the museums, I mean, I spent lots of time in New York, all the my education and a lot of friends who worked at MoMA and the Met, and it was a lot of institutionalized art.
you mean institutionalized as in, integrated into the architecture, like
No,
installation?
it was formal.
Oh, like
It was formal.
canonical, like art history on the walls.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then after business school at Yale, and it was great. Like there was the British Museum at Yale. Like everywhere that I went, there was just deep history, right? And it was canonical. That's the right word.
Hmm.
And then I moved to LA and and it was just fun. I mean, it was playful and artists were abounding around me everywhere.
Yeah.
And there was light and there was air, and they had
Yeah.
studios and they had art galleries, and it was social
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was interactive and it was
Yeah.
engaging and it felt like the fourth wall was broken, and that
Yeah.
was when I realized art makes you feel so alive, and it just that to me was critical. It was the LA years of this is something, that ignites you.
People love art in Los Angeles. I think the city has returned the favor. I think the city loves art. And, of course, we think about media and the film industry when we think about Los Angeles and, oh, I don't know, models and rock stars there on Sunset Boulevard. There's this, big cliche. But the truth is, if you think about you know, um, Charles and Ray Eanes and the Case
Uh-huh.
Study Homes, and then, of course,
Sure.
Ed Ruscha and the Ferris Gallery. And today you have, Henry Taylor and Mark Bradford. I mean, it's breathtaking. And I think part of what makes it interesting is that it's so far from New York and so far from Europe. You know, I don't think they even thought of a paradigm to break. You know, as far as,
Mhm.
like, outside the box thinking is concerned, it was I heard something recently, talking about all of the materials that a lot of the light and space artists were using, and it's because they were making their own surfboards and stuff like this. I mean,
Yeah.
this was sort of born out of an environment that was, very, very natural to them. So you have these surfers making architectural installations. I mean, it's very, very unique, and it's very, very fascinating, and it's ultimately very liberating relative to, history.
Yeah, and Nancy Corzine, working with, plastic polymers and road paints that were reflective, and Ken Price getting just wild with his ceramics, and
Yeah, yeah,
it was, I mean, that whole beach, Frank Gehry with James Turrell and Ed Ruscha and Larry Bell, like, that was a crew,
yeah,
and, you know,
yeah,
and
yeah.
then they set up cool bars in downtown LA, and then the son of one of them, like, became one of the guys that started to convert downtown LA. It was just, it was that
Who is that? Whose son?
it was Ed Moses.
Oh, Ed Moses. Okay, okay.
Said
Yeah,
Moses is
yeah,
the bar man, and he came up with some amazing spots in the Arts District in downtown LA, and then it
yeah.
would get into the cool fashion pop-ups and
You've been to the Hauser and Wirth Gallery, right, downtown LA? I
oh,
mean,
yeah.
there's chickens
Yeah.
in the place,
I
you know?
know.
And
Yeah.
plants, all the plants out front. I mean, it's such an experience before you even get to the galleries to look at any art, the
Yeah.
environment, you're downtown, once again, chickens and, the restaurant and plants, and you're like, "My goodness, what's going on here?" It goes so way beyond the objects of the wall, and, I think it's really, really interesting, that, the context around art, this goes back to what we were saying before, sort of sets expectations and sort of, primes your senses for, a very, very unique experience. So, getting back to
It
some of the art stuff.
does. Well,
Yeah.
there's one other thing I realized. So all this sort of multimedia, multisensorial
Mhm.
feeling of LA, and it got to be played out a lot in downtown because, you had SciArc
Yeah.
architects that were right there near Hauser and Wirth, and
Mhm.
so many cool, playful galleries and stores and, skateboard stores that were, hand painted by local artists. And I bought one of my first prints by an artist named Knowledge Bennett at a really cool store there. A former buyer from Prada, who's this just wonderful artist himself, pulled together jewelers and fashion people and artists. Knowledge Bennett took the photograph of Slick Rick with a bottle of Dom Perignon and a Fendi bag at his feet and put all kinds of different faces, like Hillary Clinton and Abe Lincoln, and mine is the one I got is Basquiat, and just superimpose the face on top of this Slick Rick iconic photograph, and turn them into these just sort of statements about who is this person from history superimposed on 80s rap excess, ethos. And I saw Knowledge a couple of years later at Art Basel, at the Nada tent on the beach. And I was like, "Oh my god, the framing cost more than the piece," but he's gotten bigger by that time, and it was so fun to see how his career had grown, and we were bonding about downtown LA and basically, like, the alleyway galleries that where he'd gotten started, and I just feel like that was the era where experimentation led to exposure. And that was so neat. And so when I was developing the proper hotel, I worked with a few friends who know a lot of artists, and I was really trying to get one muralist to do a piece on a big stairwell that some of our rooms looked onto. And I was in love with this guy. So our building looks onto the Mayan Theater, which is a historic building and is great. It will never be, it will always be preserved. And the artist that my friend brought is Aman Resorts, who is now in the University of Texas collection, the Landmark collection.
Oh, nice.
He is an extraordinary artist, and he's Peruvian, he's from LA, he's kind of Incan. The Blanton Museum did a full retrospective of his work. He's probably not even 45 years old. He's so cool. He's a DJ. He was doing a SF MoMA show, a full show, and when I was trying to get him to do a mural on our big stairwell concrete wall, and it would have been so beautiful to have the, like, Incan, presence of his just stunning, kind of gold block, Native American, Latin American, really, beautiful forms across the street from the Mayan Theater. Really loving to kind of celebrate a lot of the heritage. And I love it. He just said, I don't want to be associated with a really commercially successful interior designer, so I'm going to
Hmm.
pass. And I just love that. I was like, oh my God, the number of artists who would just die to have Kelly Whistler alongside, their portfolio. And my hat was off to him. And I'm glad to see his work exploding. He's just great.
Well, that's where it's a little bit tricky because a lot of people in the hospitality space and in architecture, we'll talk about design, but they're going to stop short of taking art for art's sake seriously, you know? But
Hmm.
you obviously cross that line, you're not afraid to sort of engage with art for art's sake. So, um, it's an issue, I think, the line between art and design. I mean, sometimes it's obviously the case, but there's also a gray area there, and it's hard to navigate. And some artists just choose not to engage at all. So, and tell me, as a collector, are is your motivation more about pleasure, contemplation? What sort of drives you for your personal collection?
Oh, it's all pleasure. It's Well, but there's also real pleasure in supporting artists
Mm,
whose stories I get behind and believe in. I would say uh, I have several female artists that I have loved to watch their trajectory and
mhm.
have invested in them. Gisela Colon. I have a beautiful triptych of hers. On some just stunning Belgian wood, and she's fantastic. Um, and Hulika Lackner is a young artist, I think Ukrainian, but lives in LA. Um, yeah, a number of pieces. RF Alvarez from Austin, I bought when I just was mesmerized by his capacity to storytell and to kind of leave you wanting more on the canvas, and I just think that's such a beautiful tease. and and I think part of his story is that he's on the rise, and so that was also kind of a timely buy, which might have been the first time I said, okay, let's just do that now.
Yeah, well, there's an interesting validation when something that you find interesting, finds a broader audience, so you know that the
Hmm.
conversation that's being generated, the narrative is one that's connecting, beyond just yourself, and that's interesting. Once the notion of a sort of community consensus starts to build around an artist, it's great to watch, you know, sort of the audience start to build around an artist, and it's not just like your own, personal quirk that's into it. There's a certain validation there.
That I've never sold. Have you sold your own personal pieces?
So, I mean, nothing that's from my personal collection. For somebody in my position, there's a difference between art as inventory and art
Right.
as, something that my kids have grown up around. That's entirely different. I love it all. As a dealer, I would never touch anything that I did not believe in profoundly. You just can't really, uh, uh, you know, deal with that. Uh, I remember in Paris, I talked with a prominent dealer's son, and he got out of the business entirely because he was like, either I wanted to own the object and I didn't want to sell it, and he said, or I felt bad about selling it because it wasn't up to my standards, so I didn't want it. So he was caught in this in between a rock and a hard place. He was just like, I can't. So he started building software. And then yeah, and now I think he just buys art that he loves and he's, outside of these tough choices, I guess. So in the last couple of years, we've talked about the art industry being in something of a slump. Galleries are closing. Gosh, even some nonprofits are having a hard time getting funding. It's complicated. So one thing that you hear often is that this is due to a sort of generational shift, right? Where our parents were interested in objects and objects of value or objects of contemplation, but art objects, where the younger generations are more interested in experiences, right? This is like I said, it's something that's pretty common, and I see the point. I have this belief that architecture can actually bridge that space between experience and aesthetics. I'm convinced that beyond any notion of luxury or even hospitality, that architecture creates experiences that I don't want to be overly dramatic and say, it's going to save the art world, but I see a world where we're starting to get back to the kind of architectural based installation slash experiences. And, we could sort of rediscover the value of aesthetics, not through, domestic scale paintings, but architectural scale environments. That's a little long winded way of saying I think that architecture and design needs to be seen or needs to be more appreciated as an art in and of itself. And, you know, and us just not think about discrete objects as artworks only.
Have you made it to Michael Heiser's city yet?
No, no, I have not. Tell us about it.
I haven't either. I've tried, and it's amazing how you get your paperwork ready and your team ready who you want to go with, and everybody goes online, and the spots go away, within minutes, on
Mm.
the one day a year that they release them. And that is exactly, I think, what you're talking about, to an extreme. It's an entire made up and city in the middle of the desert in Nevada. It's all architecture. It's a complete creation that feels Roman. One big giant kind of scene and setting to make us understand our humanity and the scale of who we are in this world. And I would say Louis Kahn, my goodness, if anybody has not seen the movie My Architect, I highly recommend it. It's a complicated man who had secret families, but was one of the best architects in the history of time. And he built a government building for, I believe it was Jakarta, and the government representative who was talking to the very confused and hurt son, legitimate son of Louis Kahn, who was doing this documentary, trying to kind of get some answers. He said, the monumentality of this structure that your father created for our newly established democracy was so fitting and so perfect, and we never would have had an understanding of what this true philosophical concept of our political freedom meant had your father not given us this building. And, whatever imperfect human he might have been or father, um, you should know what gifts he gave us with that. I really love when something can break through with that kind of power. And I think that's what you got me thinking with the lightning field and the Roden crater. I would sleep on the worst bed in the world to be in the presence of that awe. And so we don't have to in future, but it's kind of wonderful to prioritize and to understand what our priorities are. And that's always been the role of art, isn't it? I think architecture invites us in, and I still think the art is there to truly make us think even further. So the rest of it is the trappings. And I can talk all day long about what the luxury guest needs and how we sort of parse that out for the willingness to pay. But really, when we are in the presence of that kind of greatness and we are able to find the people who are willing to create those spaces and experiences for us, it's quite priceless.
That's a perfect place for us to stop.
I love it.
Channing Henry, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
This was a pleasure, Carlos. It's so fun speaking with you. Thank you for the conversation.